Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. I want to welcome you to our first ever Hungry for History Student Showcase. It's something I hope that we do every year going forward as an opportunity to hear from some of our local college students and scholars about the research they're doing on Savannah and Georgia history and topics, and give them an opportunity to, practice their presentation and public speaking skills. So a win-win for all of us. We've got two sessions today. Some of you are signed up for just this session, and some of you are going to stay with us for our next session. I'm Luciana Spraker. I'm with the city's Municipal Archives Department. A couple of things before I introduce our speakers for session one. If you have a cell phone with you, if you'll mute it or turn it off so it doesn't go off, that would be great. We do not have a speaker in here, so I'm going to ask our speakers if they make sure they project. And if you're having trouble hearing, maybe, just kind of give us a gentle reminder. We can't close the door because it locks, so people coming in then can't get in. So we do have a little bit of noise in the back. So if you think that's going to be a problem, we have spaces up front, so go ahead and take this opportunity to move up closer to the podium so you can hear. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers. They're each going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you have comments or questions, I'm going to ask you to hold it to the end, and then we'll have an opportunity and you can ask all of the speakers your questions at that time. So our first speaker is going to be Ella Mortenson. She's with the Savannah College of Art and Design. She's studying interior design and preservation design, and I'll actually go to our agenda. Her topic or presentation is the historic East Side Theater, reclaiming Savannah's Black entertainment history. And we get lots of questions about this building at the Municipal Archives. So super excited to hear Ella's presentation. After Ella, we're going to hear from Emmy Higashiyama. She's an independent scholar. She's very interested in heritage preservation. Some of our other recent projects have included Georgia opera houses. And I've met Emmy through her association with the Coastal Museums Association, where she recently talked about another food-related topic, which was really interesting. She's going to present Hungry for Jewish Food, how Mickve Israel's food festival evolved and where it could go. And then following her, we have Shawanda Passmore-Jeff with Savannah State University, who has studied history and public administration. Her topic, Savannah's first female Black school crossing guard. And we first met Shawanda when she donated through our West Broad Street community archiving event, and we got to see some of the great pictures that you're going to see today, which are really special. So I'm going to invite Ella up to do the first presentation.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for having me. Decades of musical, cinematic, and cultural history lie on the shoulders of a singular derelict building on Savannah's East Broad Street. The historic East Side Theater is one of two remaining African American theaters in Savannah, built during the period of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation through the South. This theater is a small part of an incredibly rich period of history from the 1880s to the 1960s that spans vaudeville, jazz, swing, cinema, theater, and more. I discovered this theater last fall as I was running past it in the mornings. Before I knew anything about the history, it intrigued me beneath the peeling paint and graffiti. I soon found out that I am not the first to take interest in this building and that it has intrigued Savannahans for years. Countless SCAD students have used this building to design hotels, restaurants, and other adaptive reuse proposals. In 2021, students from SCAD's visual effects program created a restored visual experience of the theater, helping create a sense of what it may have been like in its prime. There are no publicly accessible photographs of this theater during its time. The only reference material available is this architectural drawing during its construction. The East Side Theater has a fascinating history in itself, and it played a vital role within the surrounding community from 1946 to 1969. Unfortunately, very little information is available about it, aside from newspaper clippings and brief mentions in Charles Elmore's book, All That Savannah Jazz. Last fall, what began as a research project on this specific site led me into a deep dive through 90 years of Black entertainment history in Savannah. I began to learn of the deep and beautiful history of West Broad Street, now Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, on which I had driven nearly every single day without giving it a second thought. The East Side Theater is an emblem of a far greater history that the vast majority of Savannians know little to nothing of. It cannot be understood without first looking at the greater context of Jim Crow era segregation, the history of West Broad Street, and Savannah's urban renewal. Jim Crow laws across the South enforced separate facilities and public spaces for white and Black citizens. Neighborhood boundaries, libraries, schools, social events, medical care, and employment opportunities were all affected by these laws. Each of these divisions were present in Savannah, as well as segregated beaches, pools, and lunch counters in downtown department stores. One of the most prevalent examples of Jim Crow in Savannah was the separate but unequal park system. In a city that is renowned for its idyllic parks, I was shocked to learn that Savannah's Black community was almost entirely barred from access to the city's most coveted amenities for years. During the Jim Crow era, Black Savannians were not permitted entry into most squares or the city's largest and best maintained parks, Forsyth and Dauphin, unless accompanying a white child. Various local ordinances prevented loafing and loitering in parks, streets, restaurants, and pool rooms. These Jim Crow laws effectively made it incredibly difficult for the Black community to gather anywhere in Savannah and pushed African American citizens to the outskirts and edges of town. But it was on one of these edges that Black community and culture flourished. West Broad Street, today known as Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, was nicknamed Savannah's Black Wall Street and the Harlem of the South. It was recognized as one of the South's centers of Black capitalism in the first half of the 20th century. Over 200 Black-owned businesses thrived there: doctors, dentists, barbershops, pharmacies, theaters, and social clubs. It was also a melting pot for Jewish, Greek, Italian, and Chinese entrepreneurs in Savannah. As Kenneth Alexander put it, West Broad Street was a vibrant, self-sustaining Black community. It was as hip and progressive as any large city. Aside from its economic flourishing, West Broad was renowned for its booming entertainment industry. It was a great jazz mecca and a hot spot for entertainment in Savannah. Savannah was nationally recognized as one of the hottest entertainment hubs on the eastern seaboard. From the vaudeville of the early 20th century to decades of jazz to the swing bands that followed, West Broad was a destination for white and Black Savannians alike. Many West Broad clubs and theaters were part of the Chitlin Circuit, which was a collection of performance venues across the country where African Americans could safely perform during the era of racial segregation. Savannah did have other theaters downtown. The Wise, Lucas, Avon, and Savannah Theater were white only or provided extremely limited balcony seating for Black patrons. However, although the seating areas were segregated even in the Black-owned clubs of West Broad, everybody was drawn there during the days of jazz and swing, regardless of race. As Charles Elmore said, music was a colorblind enterprise that soothed Blacks and whites together, from the opera days of the 1880s at the Old Savannah Theater to the heyday of the Flamingo Club, in spite of a segregated Southern society. The Pekin was Savannah's first movie theater created for African American Savannians in 1913, and it set the tone for cinema experience on West Broad. This theater was owned by Josephine Stiles, one of the only Black female theater proprietors of the time. Stiles created one of the first movie palaces, with a beautiful and ornate parlor featuring confectionery, cigar stand, and seating area where people could gather in community. The theater played popular films and also supported race filmmakers by showing Black independent films. Soon, the Airdome and the Star Theaters arose as competitors, owned and operated by white proprietors. A few years later, the Dunbar Theater opened. As Charles Elmore put it, this theater was built by Black entrepreneurial genius in 1921 by a group of Black businessmen headed by Walter Sanford Scott. The Dunbar became the true entertainment hub in Savannah, bringing in live theater, cinema, and local and non-local musical entertainment. Its upper floor served as a hotel where nearly every great performer staying in Savannah stayed, as the majority of hotels were white only. Black Savannians have shared memories of interacting with Duke Ellington, B.B. King, and Buddy Johnson while out dining around the Dunbar. Aside from its movie palaces and influence on early cinema, West Broad was a booming music mecca, and from the 1910s to the 1950s, it served as a destination for hundreds of individual stars singing jazz and the blues, and for the big swing bands of the 40s and 50s. Savannah held its own against the great jazz centers of New Orleans, Chicago, and New York, and it had its own distinctive sound influenced by Gullah Geechee tradition. Local celebrities Teddy Adams, Joe King Oliver, and Al Cutter and the Snappy Six were known and loved through Savannah. Many of the greatest voices of the early 20th century could be found singing in the theaters and clubs that lined the street. Ma Rainey, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, Otis Redding, B.B. King, Nat King Cole, Count Basie, Ray Charles, Little Richie, and Chuck Berry are just a few of the long list of national celebrities that graced Savannah stages. They sung everywhere from the Dunbar Theater to Joe's Blue Room, Bop City, Powell Hall, Gus's Lounge, and the Flamingo Club. While the theaters and jazz clubs of West Broad Street flourished, two new theaters entered the scene on the other side of town in 1946. They were intended to serve and provide a more convenient location for the Black community living in that area. The East Side and the Melody Theaters opened a few months apart, with the East Side opening its doors in June 1946. It was designed by architect Oscar M. Hansen and built by Fred G. Wise, who also constructed the white-only Wise Theater that is now known as SCAD's Trustees Theater on Broughton Street. The Melody was located right next door and featured movies, talent shows, and swing bands, but it closed in 1952 due to competition with the East Side and was subsequently converted into St. James AME Church, which it still serves as today. The opening of the East Side in 1946 was a highly anticipated event. The theater boasted refrigerated air conditioning, a complete neon illuminated marquee, a confectionery concession stand, the latest sound equipment, and a 14 by 18-foot screen. It was also known as the Little House with the Big Shows and sat 750 audience members. Long after the Pekin had closed its doors and the Dunbar lacked modern equipment, the East Side was known as the only deluxe theater for colored patronage, the finest in the South. Throughout the 50s and 60s, it played a crucial role in fostering Black community gathering in Savannah, famous for its double feature Saturday matinees and live stage performances. It holds fond memories for many Savannians, including former Mayor Otis Johnson, who reminisced on long childhood afternoons spent there. Jody Williams remembered nights where the theater was packed full of people in their finest hats and clothes as if attending church. James Holmes said that it was all about the socialization. Aside from showing popular films and serving as a community haven, the East Side hosted performances by James Brown and Piano Red, and even served as the venue for a wedding in November 1946. One can imagine West Broad in its heyday, full of life, culture, and music. But what is left to show for it? As W. Fitzhugh Brundage puts it in his book, The Southern Past, Southerners' sense of place and identity is bound up in their memories of and historical associations with distinct locations of their past. Physical settings become sites of memory that elicit enduring and intense recollections of emotion and experience. Living in a city that is nationally acclaimed for its historic preservation, we often assume that what we see around us tells us everything we need to know about our collective past. We forget that, like all history, the built environment is not an unbiased record, but is a subjective story that has been heavily altered by systems of oppression and injustice. Savannah was one of many cities in the United States subject to the growing trend of urban renewal, which almost always targeted Black neighborhoods. Between 1957 and 1968, federally funded renewal projects destroyed more than 300,000 housing units as highway builders and downtown redevelopers joined in a national frenzy of urban clearance in the name of eliminating blighted areas. 80% of the existing structures on West Broad Street, including all of those that defined Savannah's golden era of entertainment, were slated for demolition in the early 60s. This thriving community, full of Black-owned businesses, as well as the neighborhoods of Currytown and Frogtown, were almost entirely razed to make way for the construction of I-16. The demolition displaced hundreds and erased a Black neighborhood along with landmarks of Black history. One of the greatest losses was Savannah's Union Station, which played a pivotal role in the Great Migration and served as a gateway for thousands of visitors to Savannah, including each of the great performers that came here. In my eyes, the most painful part of revisiting this moment in history comes from comparing white Savannah and Black Savannah. Brundage says that the accelerating historic preservation movement went hand in hand with wholesale urban renewal. At the same time that white preservationists were launching the largest preservation campaign in the United States, they ignored the razing of Black neighborhoods. Indeed, the destruction of historically Black neighborhoods complemented the restoration of downtown Savannah. Amidst the preservation movement and urban renewal project, Savannah's civil rights movement was well underway. with boycotts, sit-ins, and beach wait-ins being staged. Voter registration campaigns led by Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert and the highly effective civil rights campaign led by W.W. Law helped lead to the desegregation of Savannah's public facilities 8 months before the passage of national desegregation legislation. Focus was elsewhere, and by the time the extent of destruction of West Broad was recognized, it was too late to protest or try to stop it. The large-scale demolition happened in a matter of only a few years. The East Side Theater and the Melody Theater were some of the only structures spared, saved from the same fate by their location on the opposite end of town. As previously mentioned, the Melody Theater became St. James AME Church in 1952, and it still serves as a church today. Since the East Side closed in 1969, it has suffered misuse, water damage, roof decay, and sat abandoned for years. The interior of the theater was gutted for the building to serve briefly as a mattress factory before being abandoned once again. In February 2024, this building was sold for $2.7 million, and plans for the future have been made. The new owner of the building is the Rhino Collective, a development group that wants to bring new life to the buildings in Savannah sitting unused. Their plan is to restore the building, creating a food hall with a shared space and 2 small 50-seat theaters. Surrounding the building, the developers plan to construct 3 buildings 4 to 5 stories high, creating a mixed-use apartment complex with 15% affordable to Savannah's working class. The general public has mixed opinions on the matter, with some optimistic about the revitalization of Savannah's east side as a whole, while others fear the ripple effects of the development. I am hopeful for the future of this space, knowing that the owners and designers value connecting future generations with the stories inherent to historic places. This building carries so much more than its own history. It is one of Savannah's only emblems for the devastating losses of urban renewal. The West Broad Room in Savannah's Civil Rights Museum and the Savannah Jazz Room in the Savannah History Museum tell bits and pieces of this story. But the rehabilitation of the East Side and future exhibit space there could truly honor Savannah's African American cinema history and broader entertainment history in the city. Memory is attached to physical environments, and what remains of the East Side Theater provides a unique opportunity to uplift Savannah's Black entertainment history in a space that is directly connected to it. Thank you.
As a reminder, we're going to hold questions to the end, and I'll invite any of us. And our speakers, if you just make sure you project.
Thank you. Great job, Ella. And if you can't hear me, just hold your hands up to your ears, and hopefully I'll notice you. Talk louder. Okay. Congregation Mickve Israel is unique among Southern Jewish communities because it was the first Jewish congregation that was in Savannah. You can't be the first one. Their ship arrived the same year as the ship that carried James Oglethorpe arrived, but not exactly landed, and a predominantly Spanish-Portuguese origin as opposed to Eastern European. For more on this, go to the Mickve Israel tour and discover why this makes a difference in the type of Jewish community that thrives in Savannah. Its biggest event of the year is the Shalom Yal Food Festival, and there are non-Jewish people who look forward to this every year because it's the only time of the year where they can gorge on Jewish food. And if you think about it, for having such a strong presence in Savannah, there aren't really many or really any Jewish restaurants in town. It's quite different from, for example, New York City, where you can't be in that city and not interact with Jewish culture. So the food festival here in Savannah, more than a fundraiser, is really a community outreach event. And depending on who you ask, there are different versions for how the food festival started here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one version is that a foodie restaurateur couple from here were living in New Orleans, where they have Jewish food festivals, and they are completely non-kosher. And again, that has something to do with the migration patterns of the overall Jewish diaspora populations. And so when this couple moved back here, they decided to start one here. These events were more informal at the beginning, and they were basically for the congregation only, kind of like a potluck for members to share recipes and get to know each other as a social event other than formal services and lunches. And so there isn't really a solid start year, but because this year is officially the 35th year, that puts the first year at 1989. But again, because of the different versions, some would say 1988, who knows? In any case, late 1980s. Then around 1998, so about 10 years into this congregational potluck format, the food festival became a public event and was moved to Forsyth Park. So you have tents and tables laid out along the main walkway that's closest to the table in Forsyth on the north end. And I'm not sure why a funeral home, and it's a sponsor, is paired with the condiments, but okay. They got a little bit more sophisticated with listing sponsors and food tents. Now, as you can see from this 2011 city permit, so about a decade of being in Forsyth, the execution of a public event is largely dependent on the anticipated attendance. It's 8,000 is kind of the ballpark figure for that time. Now, if you've run any sort of event or if you've attended one, public or private, the size and scale of the audience and logistics is a huge factor in how smoothly or unsmoothly the event goes. So for example, getting all the food and supplies from Mickve Israel building to Forsyth Park is a major undertaking. And the best way is golf carts. Well, one year, some miscommunication resulted in almost not having any golf carts. And so the food festival leadership had to find a solution on the Saturday night before the Sunday morning event. And that's just one example. I'm sure if you talk to enough people, there's a whole book on everything that could have gone wrong and did go wrong. Another big issue anytime food is involved, and there's no way around this because this is a food festival, is the compliance with health department standards. Now, when the city first started regulating food festivals, the official looked at the permit application and said, okay, you need 10 tents. But a single booth could require 10 tents because, for example, everybody wants latkes. And in fact, the Food Fest organizers' response to that was, no, we need 60 to 70 tents. So when the needs of an event organizers exceed the city's requirements for compliance, it's not a stretch to say that Mickve Israel helped write the city manual on food festivals. And this is why the Jewish Food Festival, from several perspectives, became the city's banner food festival. Not just because you always get a big news crew covering the event, but because from a city governance perspective, the food sourcing and handling at a kosher level outdoors is very different. It's going to be a higher standard than a non-kosher food event indoors. And if some smaller food festival is being organized and someone complains that the dietary compliance rules are too strict, then the city officials can say, the Jews do this just fine, what's your problem? Now by 2018, people are getting tired of schlepping all the food and stuff from Temple to Forsyth. It's a big job in and of itself. So organizers started eyeing Monterey Square, and it's right there in front of the temple. And even though it may not feel like it, the square footage increased when going to this street party style. And Temple provides the electricity, Wi-Fi that the festival requires to accommodate the growing demands. Now, part of keeping up with the demand is switching up the marketing and keeping the festival fresh. So that's why the menu is slightly different every year. The entertainment lineup is meant to be upbeat and inspiring. And the challenge of being a banner food festival, for example, because it's not like the Jews all got together and conspired to beat out the competition for food festivals. Yeah, that's not really what this is ever about. But you can't keep everything exactly the same every year and not become a boring food festival. So in one kind of gimmicky, fun spoof, they took this famous Wendy's Where's the Beef commercial theme to Where's the Corned Beef, but that didn't last because of copyright issues. Another big challenge was COVID. In fact, some people might say a virtual Jewish food festival doesn't really count. So is this year really the 35th year? And plus the whole, when did it really officially start? But really, when we're talking about historically significant events and traditions, especially food traditions, and we're always eating, right? The point isn't so much the exact dates, but the preserving and sharing of cultural heritage. The number one goal of the food festival is for Mickve Israel as an institution of a people group, the Jewish community, to invite the non-Jewish community in. This is from a sponsorship packet that basically is saying, you're not just paying money to order some dishes, it's the intent and commitment to ensure a rich history doesn't die out. And this is particularly a sensitive subject when you include global events and context. For example, October 2023, if you remember, that was a tense time because there were fresh disputes over the Gaza Strip, led to a surprise Hamas-led attack on Israel, killing about 1,200 people, and then Israel retaliated by invading the Gaza Strip. I mean, nobody really could figure out, who they should be rooting for in that situation. And so people were wondering, should the 2023 Jewish festival, food festival here in Savannah, be canceled? And thankfully, it wasn't canceled. It started off, as it always does, with the shofar blowing. And now it's in Monterey Square, so it's been moved to its permanent home. And this is likely the permanent physical home of the food festival. It's not, it's bigger than what it could have been at Forsyth. It's easier to move all these things around. And last year was a record-breaking year. And this year, which is November 9th, mark your calendars. If it's anything like last year, the food festival is bursting at the kosher sausage seams. Monterey Square is at max square footage. There's nowhere to add more booths. And there's something to be said about how making something like this bigger isn't going to make it better. Which brings us to the second goal of the food festival, that it's just as much for the congregation members as it is for the outside community, because you don't really get to know each other if you're only attending services and eating meals together. You get the best sense of camaraderie when each person is contributing to the big picture in the format of a huge group task. Unless you're one of those volunteers who just talks and disappears partway through. By the way, if you'd like to volunteer, they're already looking. Please call up Mickve Israel and tell them your interest. And that brings us to the third goal of the food festival, which is fundraising. You certainly don't want to go into debt to pull off a huge event like this, and you'd like to at least break even. And if you have extra money, that's very nice. But even the money isn't really meant, what it's really meant for is to invest back into the community so the heritage preservation and the building preservation doesn't die out. When we look at an impressive building like this, we think, oh, how nice, pretty. But it's really the people and the activity inside it and associated with it that makes the building have meaning. Otherwise, it's just an empty building that can, So the question now is, can the Jewish Food Festival be sustained? Remember that when this first all started, it was a group of people in their 40s and 50s, and now 35, 36 years later, they're all in their 80s. And there isn't really a ready younger guard in the prime of their lives to fill in the gaps. So when we're talking about where could the Jewish Food Festival go from here, well, let's hope that it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this auspicious occasion. My girls are doing great, aren't they? Maybe a little sheepish today. Today I'm going to be talking about the technically first black school crossing guard in Savannah, which happens to be my grandmother. I'm going to attend the speech. The Fabulous Five is what they were called, and Mrs. Passmore was the first of the 5 women to be hired as a school crossing guard. The group was known as the Fabulous Five. Their names are as follows from left to right, my grandmother being the first. Mildred Passmore, she was over Gaston Elementary. Ruth Smalls, she did Harris Elementary, which is what I'm going to be doing some more research on because that elementary school doesn't exist anymore. Rebecca Jackson, she did Spencer Elementary, which is now Andrea B. Lewis. And Jessie Mack did Carla Beach, which I graduated from. And Glass Jenkins did Florence Street Elementary School, which also is not a school anymore either. The gentleman in the middle, his name was Leroy Wilson. He was the chairman of the Citizen Voter Organization. And what he did was design the setup to get the school crossing guards, the first black police officers, the 12 that dropped to 9, and then the dispatch people in the police dispatchers inside on Havisham Street. He had that group had they headed up to get that organized to have it done. Humble beginnings. It all started when Mrs. Passmore used to walk her children to school due to dangerous streets that they had to cross to get to school. Other children began to walk with them in numbers, not only for safety to cross the streets, but to be safe from other entities that happened during that time. Thanks to a woman who was coming to the church where Mrs. Passmore and W.W. Law were registering people to be able to vote, the journey began. The woman mentioned that the police department was hiring high school crossing guards for the school board. Mrs. Passmore went down to Havisham Street to apply, and the rest was history. The other 4 women were called in for an interview at that same time, but Mrs. Passmore was the first to be interviewed and hired that day. This picture was really small. I tried to blow it up, but it got a little blurry. But this area right here, and I have another picture, is where Gwinnett and May Street is, where Gaston Elementary Street is. You get a little sense of the time like there. You got people on the porch there. And this is a Jewish store. And she was in the intersection there of Gwinnett and May. Facing an obstacle. There were other white women also applying for those jobs, as well as applying for those jobs, but due to the mandatory desegregation law mandated by the federal government, they were not hired and felt looked over. Due to this, the department tried to discourage the 5 by telling them that if they lose a child to injury or being hit by a car, that they would be fired. Some of the white counterparts got wind of this information, and during the school operation hours, they made attempts to try to hit the kids with the cars so that the 5 could be fired. Their attempt of trying to do that failed, and not one of the guards lost any child to injury. The other part to that was, my grandmother said that the area that now they use 4 people to guard that area. She was only the one person that held that part down. And there was an incident where a child was about to be hit, and she pushed him out the way and got bumped, and she walked with a limp, so then we called her Tip. This is another picture of Gwinnett Street and May Street as she's getting the kids from the store. The store was Rosenberg's. I'm also looking that up as well. This little gentleman right here, running across the street, is my father. He was supposed to be going to school, and her son, and he decided he was going to use his lunchroom money for candy. This is the last picture of my grandmother that she took. She did 22 years of service there, and this was the picture they took for her last day. There was no cars or anything out there. She was just standing. And that is the end of my presentation. It would have been longer, but I hope to cut it short.
I want to thank all of our speakers. And so now, if you have any questions for any of them or comments, I invite you to ask any of the 3. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for the presentation about the Jewish Food Festival. Where you indicated that there was a point where it was virtual and that was just during COVID, so they did away with it because it was no longer necessary, or it just wasn't successful?
No, they didn't do away with it, I think, because of food safety things. So they reduced it and just took online orders.
Okay.
And then had a pickup window. But then they had set aside a time that was like a live streamed YouTube event. And so people, they had instructions. So if you had ordered food, they would have instructions in the packet, like how to reheat it or something like that. But then they would do like a demonstration of it, and then people could watch it.
But that's no longer an option with the present day, right?
No, because it was really just for the 1 or 2 years that they had to do it that way.
Okay, gotcha.
I think there was Wilma.
What year was Miss Passmore hired, and for how many years did she work as a crossing guard?
It was 1955 to 1977.
And I'm her daughter.
That's her daughter.
I've got a hand in back.
Were the crossing guards honored within their communities for their leadership? Or was it considered just one more staff person that worked for the school and the school board?
Well, they were not. They never had anything set aside to give them any kind of honor. The very first picture that I have, they took that picture downstairs inside of the Havisham branch where the police department, the police office place is right there on Havisham. It was downstairs in there. That was the only thing that they did when they finally made it through.
They were actually, at that time, they were under the police department.
Yeah.
Now they're under the school board.
Yeah.
That
I
answers
think,
my question.
yeah, I think Glenda, you had your hand up?
I had a question for you too. You said no child ever got injured and then your mother pushed one out of the way, or
Right.
your grandmother, and avoided that one. Did any other crossing guard ever get hit by that attempt?
No, she was the only one that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Ms. Mortenson. Does the Rhino Collective have any plans to display something within the East Side Theater to, like, just display the history?
So upon initially reading their plans, I didn't think that there was anything. It wasn't until later that I actually met with a different company that's called DMGG2, and they do museum exhibition design. I found that they were involved in the East Side project, although that wasn't advertised on the Rhino Collective's website. So to my understanding, DMGG2 is going to be involved in creating some sort of exhibition space within the East Side Theater, which I found very encouraging. They mentioned doing some sort of 4D immersive space. So I look forward to seeing the way that they commemorate that history.
Yes.
When are they supposed to start their renovations under there? Have they
Well,
come with any-
I think they were already supposed to long ago.
Yeah.
If you saw the photo that I had from 2012 to right now in 2025, the theater has completely deteriorated even more.
Yes.
And it's very sad to see the way that it has fallen into disrepair. It sounds like they are waiting on funding to continue with the project, and everyone is very hopeful that it continues forward because it's been sitting abandoned for so many years. Yeah.
Pat. I'll go ahead, Pat.
Okay. Hi, I enjoyed each presentation, learned from each one, and have something to say about each one. But anyway, I'll start with Ella. I'm looking around, and maybe I'm the only one, or maybe one other person actually sat in the East Side Theater. So I have lots of memories about that. There's so many anecdotes we could tell. I don't know how they made money. You were good in school. All you had to do was collect your bottles. You could do bottle tops to get in for admission. You could do milk cartons, 5 milk cartons to get in for admission. The luxury part, I really have trouble. But it was really a sense of community. It was when children, it helped to control the neighborhood, discipline. It was a time for young people to come together without worrying about any conflicts or anything like that. I mean, I can remember specific days. We'd sit there from hour to hour.
All day?
Tarzan movies, I mean, okay, so it seems like we have some oral history. I would love to.
I was on the west side, so we didn't start yet.
Okay.
My husband did the east side though.
Okay.
Because we were east
We
side.
couldn't go there for it.
Right. And that's one of the things too, of course, Ms. Jeff. If you notice, she has on a uniform. They had to wear white tops, navy skirts. If you look at the crossing guards today, they don't have that presentation.
Yes.
They had a hat. They had a uniform. Now you don't see that. And it says something about that era, that there was dignity,
Yes.
there was wonderful representation. And she said they were not under the school board. They were under the police department. And one of the lieutenants that my mother used to work for was Robert Funk. You remember Robert Funk? Yes, and he did not play around with those ladies. But it was a sense of again, dignity, representation. And I actually went to that daycare behind her. That's in Kate Holmes. Right there in May, and when that as Kate Home Daycare, I actually went to that daycare as a child. So, we used to walk with mom to work, and with my sister and I went to that actual daycare. But, I said that because now the school crossing guards, they don't have the same, I don't want to say, they're not unified, if that makes sense. Because back then, they had something to prove, that they could handle that job, and they did a great job.
But I think you had your hand up.
I was gonna ask you, Ellen, just the firm that wants to redevelop the theater, do they have any sort of, do they have a local entity that they're working with, or are they totally outside the Savannah community?
They have, yeah, I might be able to provide the link to their website. They do have a lot of information on there. They're working with an interior design firm within Savannah. They're working with an architecture firm based out of Atlanta, but they have lots of experience with historic rehabilitation and different engineers. I think the engineers are also in Savannah, so they are working with local entities. And they also have mentioned wanting to work with the surrounding community and understanding the history better. So I hope that that's something that they truly do.
So have they had you scared, right? Have they shown any interest into helping to redevelop that building? And
Yeah.
I know a lot of the older schools,
Yeah.
like 37th Street School, 38th Street, a lot of the older schools, they have, Peggy Street School where I went as a kid, and they have taken over those buildings and done a lot of renovations and whatnot. So I was just wondering if they, if that's a project, that SCAD would be interested in having to at least renovate that building.
Yeah, I think it would be great if they did. I remember reading a news article from maybe 10 years ago where they had asked SCAD specifically if they would be interested, and SCAD said they were not at that time. So, yeah.
I think I saw a hand up.
I have a question or comment about Emmy's presentation, but before I do that, I wanted to, when y'all mentioned about Captain Funk, who we knew personally, but I originally knew him because he would come to our school, UFO school, when I was an elementary kid a few years ago, and he would talk about school crossing, school safety and crossing the road and how to do things safely and that kind of stuff. And my question is, because I was at an all-white school, that's what they had to do. Did he or somebody else also go to the schools that were black schools? Did Captain Funk or someone else from the police
Did
department?
Lieutenant Funk also go to the black
Lieutenant
schools?
Funk, yeah.
Or did he send one of the black officers? I'm thinking.
Or did
like-
anybody?
That's a good question.
Yeah,
Because usually with Mr. Wilson, Leroy Wilson, he was on the organization that had everything, and he may have conversed with, he was Lieutenant Funk then.
It was.
They may have, and he may have gotten information that he may need to have from that area to go to him, but my grandmother never mentioned anything about Funk being at those sites.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that.
So we could take, I'm not familiar with Mr. Wilson. We could look at Mr. Wilson and find out more information if we have in our personnel files. I'm familiar with Lieutenant Funk's work, but I'm not as familiar with this gentleman. So that might be something we can follow up with. Teresa?
Yeah, just another follow-up with that. I guess that comes from both of us having been little kids here. When Lieutenant Funk, he didn't become captain until he retired.
Right.
So everybody knew he was Lieutenant Funk. He would not only come out and I lived out in Fort Worth, but he would also do bicycle safety things, like right after school, talking about which side of the street you would ride on with the bicycle, and you get off to cross every street you have the potential. But when I was in elementary school, which has been a couple of years now too, I earned every one of my gray hairs. We did not have a school crossing guard. We had Boys and Girls Safety Patrol that was part of the school itself, and we were trained to be the crossing guard. And because it was such a small community, everybody knew everybody, and you better listen to the fifth grader who's helping you across the street, because your mom would find out if you didn't. But knowing Lieutenant Funk, there was a way of infiltrating into a different school to do something with the kiddos and helping their safety. If he were allowed to do it, he absolutely would have. And I fully suspect that by the end of your grandmother's career, maybe he was talking to those who were crossing guards, just like he was talking to those of us who were on the boys and girls school safety, whatever we were, to help people across the street.
Sounds like everybody knew Lieutenant or Captain Funk. I think I have a hand up here if I need to.
Based on this woman's comments, pardon me, not knowing your name, it does seem like there is an interest in people who grew up in this community telling their stories. And years ago, my group, Morningstar Cultural Arts, tried to do video selfies, oral history selfies through the third floor tree loft at the Bull Street Library. Since this is individual research and these are wonderful, is there a possibility that the city could offer people to come forward on a variety of topics that you would like to learn more about, and have people, while we're still young enough to talk into a camera or a cell phone, actually recount some of our memories in a public site? When we did it,
I'm
it was
gonna
very
go ahead
easy.
and stop you, because Carol, you know that's always what we're trying to do. And we're a website called savannah.ga.gov/yourhistory, where we welcome you to come and give us our memories. I wrote down here, I would like to hear all of you who have memories of the East Side Theater. Visit us or reach out to us right now and give us your memories of coming and turning in your milk cartons and your bottle caps or your memories of Lieutenant or Captain Funk, because that's exactly what we do.
She did not pay me to ask that.
You can email us, you can call us, but we also have an online portal where you can do that. So you just talk. Yeah. So that's our email address, archives@savannah.ga.gov. But we also have an online portal where you can upload photographs, or you can put in like narratives, and that is savannah.ga.gov/yourhistory. So if you want to tell us a story about Lieutenant Funk, or you want to tell us a story about the East Side Theater, or the Jewish Food Festival, you can go in there right now and put that in, or upload a picture of your grandmother or the theater or any of that. And it doesn't have to be like history from long ago, because we're creating history right now. So if you have a picture from the food festival last year, go ahead and put it in of like, you and your family at the food festival, because we're creating history every day. So we don't need to wait until somebody's dead and be like, ooh, we missed it, So yes, ma'am.
On the photos of the theaters, I didn't see addresses on most of them, and I recognized most of the buildings except the Dunbar. Is it still standing?
Yeah, where is
Dunbar is
it?
not. So the Dunbar, the Pekin, the Star, the Air Dome, all of those on West Broad Street that I talked about are all gone. The Dunbar is right where it was located right to the left of where that I-16 on-ramp comes on now.
It's on the west side of West Broad Street.
Yes, on the west side of West Broad Street.
Martin's Gate, whatever.
Yeah.
And across from like where Wendy's and stuff.
Yeah, about Wendy's.
And Burger King.
And then Union Station, I believe, was on the right
North
side.
side.
Yeah, of the
Right,
north side.
correct.
North side.
Union Station.
Well, I think we're going to go ahead and break now. For those of you who are staying for session 2, we're going to start that at 1:15. So we have some time to take a little break, walk around, stretch. There's a bathroom right across the way. if any of you want to, grab our speakers and talk to them a little bit more, please do. And I want to thank them once again for joining us.